The session here is on Power Automate approvals on the go with Flow. My name is Reza Dorani. Hello to everyone if you have seen me before. I am a BizApps MVP, a certified trainer with Microsoft, a Power Platform practice lead at my organization Catapult Systems, and the founder and leader of the Houston Power Platform user group. Apart from that, I have a YouTube channel on which I video blog on all things Microsoft 365 and specifically around the Power Platform. So there's some content in there. If you would like to check it out, go ahead. All right, so the learning objectives for the session today is Power Automate approvals. We will, let me set the stage here. 90% of my session today is going to be demos and live demos. So I'm going to risk it. I'm going to try building things on the fly. And I am silently confident that it's going to work. So let's see how things go. So the learning objectives, we're going to look at what is approvals in Power Automate and what do we mean by approvals on the go. All of this with live demos. I will then end up with some best practices and limitations that are important for you to be aware of when working with approvals in Power Automate, and then share some learning materials which you can have a look and hopefully start your journey with Power Automate approvals. Now, before we begin with Power Automate approvals, it's important to understand that Power Automate is end-to-end automation. We can connect to any cloud service using the 450 plus connectors that are available. If you would like to use the power of AI, we have AI Builder available. And if there are any systems or legacy applications that you would like to connect to, we have robotic process automation through desktop flows also available. So Power Automate truly is an end-to-end automation engine. And in Power Automate, one of the key features is approvals. And our session today is all about approvals. Approvals is a built-in action in Power Automate, which can be customized to fit your business needs. And in approvals, you have multiple options to choose from depending upon the type of the approval scenario you are trying to create. For example, everyone must approve. All the approvers have to approve. The first to respond. The first approver who responds, their decision will be considered final. Wait for all responses. Wait for everyone to respond and then accordingly take your decision further. Or wait for one response in which you can wait for a single response and then take a specific action. You can also have external users who are not a part of your tenant, participate as part of your approval process. Approvals on the go means you can take the decision as the approver for the approval action that has been assigned to you from multiple locations. First is the approval center dashboard, which is available in Power Automate. So if I go to flow.microsoft.com and go to my approval center dashboard, and I can view all my approval requests. I can see the requests that I have sent, the ones that I have received. I can even see all my historical information in there. The second option is from your inbox through something known as actionable messages. So once an approval task has been assigned to you, you will receive a notification email. And in that notification email, you can directly take the action or respond to the approval task. These are known as actionable messages. The third option is the Power Automate mobile app. So if you install the Power Automate mobile app on your mobile devices, you will receive the notification once an approval task is assigned, and you can respond directly from your mobile app. And now with the new Microsoft Teams approvals app, you can even respond to your approval actions directly in Microsoft Teams. Basically, you can respond to your approval action from any location of your choice. So if you're someone who likes to work in email, you'll get your notification there. If you would like to go to the dashboard, check all your requests and respond, you have the approval center dashboard. If If you would like to respond from the mobile device, you have the mobile app. And if you're someone like me who works all day in Microsoft Teams, you have the approval action directly in Teams available as well. That's why it's called approvals on the go, because no matter where you are, the approval task will come to you as long as you are the approver. And when designing these approval flows, it's important to understand that flow is extremely rich in terms of the templates that it provides. And on very similar lines, there are templates specific to approvals as well. And these are pre-built templates. In one of the demos very shortly that I will cover, I actually plan to use one of the pre-built templates. So you can see how useful they are in quickly setting up your approval flows. Advantage, they are easy to configure and you do not have to reinvent the wheel. And now we're going to head straight to demos and look at how we can use the approvals action in Power Automate. I am not looking at the chat window, so if there are any questions, please post them in the chat window and I will get to them at the end, I promise. All right, so in flow.microsoft.com, let's first focus on what is this approval action. So for that, I will head over to my flows and just create a very simple flow, a flow that triggers manually, because right now we are just trying to learn about the approval action. All right, here comes my flow. This flow is going to be triggered manually. Now, how do I start with using this approval action in flow? For that, just head over to flow and search for approvals. And under approvals, I'll try and zoom in. You have three actions. Start and wait for an approval, wherein the approval process will start and wait until it receives a response. And that response depends upon the type of the approval, which we will look at shortly. But start and wait means the process begins and waits. That means the flow will not execute further. The flow will stop at that point until the approval decision is made. On the other side, we have create an approval and wait for an approval. Now, these two actions are exactly the same as start and wait for an approval. The only difference is here, I can create an approval. That means the approval task is created, but the flow does not wait. The flow will move ahead. And when I would like to execute a wait, I can then call the wait for an approval action and stop my flow so that it can wait for the response for the approval. So you have two options here, either start and wait for an approval or create the approval action. Maybe you would like to take some additional actions after that. Take those actions, maybe update my record, maybe send some notification emails to some system of record or to some users, and then go ahead and wait for the approval response. So I will go ahead and use the start and wait for an approval action. We'll focus on this one. The first property is approval type. Now in this, we have four options. And we've kind of covered that in the slide deck. Everyone must approve. That means every approver that I identify as part of this approval task has to say approved. If even one of those approvers rejects it, the entire approval task outcome will be rejected. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'll pick everyone must approve. And the moment I pick the approval type, it opens up the other properties. Now, the first question is, what's the title of your approval? I'm going to say Global Bootcamp. Okay. Next, who are you assigning this approval task to? Now in here, you have to plug in email addresses and email addresses only. They cannot be AD groups. They cannot be security groups or Office 365 groups. They have to be individual email addresses. And these users who are you going to plug in here have to be active users, of course, in your tenant. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and assign this approval task to myself. So I'm creating an approval task right now, and I've just assigned this to one user. If I need additional users, I can just plug in the additional email addresses in here, semicolon separated. Next, I can define the details of my approval. This is basically the body of that approval task. Here I can plug in details about my approval, right? What is this task about? Who is this for? And so on and so forth. So maybe I'm just going to plug in Global Bootcamp right here. I can even provide a link to an item that is currently under approval. I can provide some description for that. And if you head over to show advanced options, there are some additional options I can play with. One is requester. Now flow runs under the context of the owner account, basically the person who created the flow, under whose context the connections are running in the flow. So in this case, Reza is creating the flow. But if this flow is triggered by a user action in a system of record, for example, in that case, the approval task would still go under Reza's account. Although the requester is someone else, that's because Reza has built the flow. So if you would like to put the original requester's name in there, we have this additional property here called requester, and all you have to do is plug in the email address of that individual right here. Enable notifications. If this is turned on, which is the case by default, this will send that email notification and the notification in Microsoft Teams now. If you would not like those notifications to go out, you can even go ahead and turn them off. I will recommend you not to do it, but you can turn it off. The approval task can also be reassigned. And by default, this is set to yes. Once again, you can turn this off. And reassignment, the way it works is a user can reassign it to any other user in the organization. You cannot limit that. You cannot limit that to a specific group. Those features are not available today. So reassignment means that user has full access to reassign their task to any other user in the organization. If you would not like to leverage that, you can go ahead and turn the reassignment feature off. And finally, if you would like to also attach some documents, maybe there's an approval process around a document that has been uploaded in your repository. You would like to attach that as part of the approval process instead of maybe linking to that document. You can even go ahead and attach those attachments right here. So these are some of the basic properties of the approval action. Once I define my approval action, the next step is, because I'm using start and wait for an approval, the flow is going to wait for the approver to take the response. In this case, the approver is me. So it'll wait for me to provide a response. Now, the next step of an approval action is typically a condition to check to see the response of the approver. So I will head over and add a condition action in flow. And right here, I can check the response of my approver. Now, if I head over to dynamic content, if you observe the response that is coming from the start and wait for an approval action, I get a lot of details about that approval action. And one of the key attributes is something known as outcome. Outcome gives you the outcome of the approval. So I'm going to leverage the outcome. And because I'm using the approval type, everyone must approve. In this case, the approver only gets two options, that is either approve or reject. These are the only two options they're going to get. So the outcome is also going to be either approve or reject. So in this case, I'm going to search for approve. Okay, so if my condition is the outcome equal to approve? Bear in mind, case sensitive, approve. It's not approved or approves, it is approve. I've seen a lot of questions on the forum when folks say I'm checking for approved and it's not working. Well, that's because it is called approve and it's given right here. So I'm checking the outcome right here, and based on this outcome, maybe I would like to take a few actions. In this case, because I'm just doing a demo, I'm just going to print something in the flow. I'm going to say, yep, this was approved. Else I'm going to copy this, paste it in the no branch. And let's say for this case, I am just going to print a message that says rejected. I will go ahead and save my flow. Very, very simple case. Just created an approval task, assigned it to Reza, and then I'm checking the outcome of the approval. If it is approved, I'm printing approve. Otherwise, I'm printing rejected. So let's go ahead and test this flow manually. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this flow. Signing me in, it's connecting to the approval action. Come on. All right, click continue and run the flow. And this now will begin the flow run. Now let's see what happens when this flow begins. Firstly, I've started this flow manually, so it says that the flow is manually triggered. The next step now, the flow is going to hit the start and wait for an approval action. And the moment it reaches this particular action, which is start and wait for an approval action, the flow will go into a wait state, right? So you see it says start and wait for an approval, and the flow did not move ahead because it's waiting. It's paused. Now, Reza as the approver would have received the approval task. And because I enabled notifications, one, Reza will receive an email which has Microsoft Flow written in it. This will change in future. But Reza will receive an email from Power Automate. Here's the title of my approval. Here's the details of my approval. Created it, requested by Reza. And right here, I have my two options, approve or reject, directly in my email itself. This is known as actionable messaging. And if I select my decision, I can even enter comments. These are optional. You cannot force the user to have these comments as mandatory. They can enter this if they want to, and then click submit, and the approval response will be recorded directly right here in the email. That's one option. Second option, if I head over to Microsoft Teams, we have this new app called the Approvals app. And right here, this app has now sent me a notification that Reza, you have received a task called Global Bootcamp. And Reza has sent this request. And right here, I can take my decision wherein I approve this, reject this, and I can enter my comments. Same experience. I can even head over to flow.microsoft.com, head over to action items and go to approvals. And this basically is my approval dashboard where I can see all my received requests. I only have one currently, which is the same request. I can see all the requests that I have sent, and I can see a history of all my approval requests. In this case, I've received the request. I can select this and I can take my response right here. And my fourth option, of course, I cannot demo that, but it's on my mobile device. I received a notification on the Power Automate mobile app as well. So all the four options that I have are all pointing to that same approval task. And if I take a decision in one location, that decision will be recorded and respected. And here is the option to reassign. I can even go ahead and reassign, and I can only reassign from the approval dashboard, by the way, but I can reassign and reassign it to any other user right here. For the purpose of this demo, I'll just respond directly from the email. So I'm going to say, OK, I approve this request, and I'm going to enter some comments and click submit. And just like that, this approval action now has been responded to. And if we quickly head back to the flow, if you would have observed, the flow now has completed. That's because this task is complete. It moved ahead into my condition. My conditional check was, what's the outcome of the approval? It was approved, so that's true. Heads over to the true branch and it's printed the word approved. The rejected branch is kind of avoided because my condition did not evaluate to true or false. So that's how easy it is for me to quickly build an approval action. But this approval action provides a lot of key data points that you can leverage. And if we look at the body of the response, and I'm going to plug this in JSON, and trust me, I'm not showing you code. I'm just trying to show you what are the different data points that we can steal from the approver's response. This comes back in a JSON format, of course. We get an array of responses. Now, why do we get an array here? The reason is because an approval task can have more than one approvers. In my case, I only had one. Even though I have one approver, it still puts an array indicator right here because there could be many approvers. And each of those approvers who respond to the approval task, we will get an object associated with it. In this case, only one task, which is Reza. And look at the details that I get. I get the display name, the email, and the user principal name of the person who responded. So here's my first approver. I get the request date, so I can see when the approval request was sent. I get the response date, so I can even check to see how long did Reza take before he responded to that approval task. I can check to see the individual response of the approver. In this case, Reza said approve, and I can even get the comments. And if I have multiple approvers, this array will give me that information for each and every approver. Apart from these independent responses, we also have some additional data points. One of them is the data point that I leveraged in the condition. I was checking to see the outcome of the approval, and this is the final outcome. In my case, because Reza said approve, my condition was everyone must approve. That's why the outcome went to approved. Simple. And that's what I was checking in the condition. Now out here, I even have something called as response summary, very useful to use in emails or maybe to log something in your history list, right? Right here, I have the full summary of the response. Who was the approver? What was the request date? What was the response date? There's so much key metadata available here that we can leverage to enhance our approval experiences. Back to my flow, I'll head over to edit again. This time, we will try and change this approval action to first to respond. Now, the behavior here or the properties here are exactly the same. There's no difference. But the only difference here is if I have multiple approvers, let's say Reza, Sarah, and James, the first person who responds, their decision will be considered final. So if James responds with reject, after that, if Reza responds, in fact, Reza will not be able to respond because it will say that the task is complete. But if anybody else tries to respond, that decision will not be considered. The first person to respond, their decision will be considered final. So that's the difference between the first two. The third and fourth options basically provide custom responses. So if you have a scenario wherein you need different options for the user apart from approve, reject, maybe yes, no, or approve, reject, deferred, whatever use case you have, you can head over to custom responses, in which again you have two options. Wait for one response, which is very similar to first to respond, and wait for all responses, which is kind of similar to everyone must approve. So let's say if I pick the custom responses option right here, once again, all the properties are the same. The only difference now is you have to define what those buttons are or what those approvers actions are. So I can say, approve, or let's make it simpler. Yes, no, or deferred. Right? So I can create my own actions right here. That's the only difference when I head over to custom responses. Needless to say, if I head over to custom responses, in that case, my condition right here cannot be checking approve. It has to be checking the values that I'm providing right here. So let's say yes, no, deferred. In my case, if I want to check for yes, I can make this yes. So these are the options that you can play with as part of the approval action. Now, this was just an example. Now let's try and see how we can use this in a few real world examples. And for that, I'm going to switch over to my next tenant. Okay, so in this case, I have a very simple SharePoint list for travel requests. Okay, I'm using SharePoint as a data source as an example. And how did I build this list? To keep it even more simple, I created the list using one of the wonderful Microsoft list templates, which is travel requests. Simple. Okay, and in this, users can come in and of course, create a travel request. Now, my use case is that when a travel request is created, I would like to have an approval process. And as part of my approval process, I have defined something known as approval status. It's a status column that tracks the status of my approval. And in this, I have a specific number of choices that I have defined. And my process is such. When a travel request comes in, it needs to first go to the user's manager for approval. In AD, of course, get the user's manager, start the approval process. If that manager approves it, then move it to the HR team for approval. If they approve it, the final status is approved. Otherwise, it's rejected. Very simple use case, a sequential approval process. And I would also like to track the history of my approval. So every action that takes place, I would like to track it and maintain it in my system of record. Well, Reza, even Flow maintains the approvals. Why do I have to maintain it in my system of record? Well, because Flow approvals are only maintained up to 28 days due to GDPR requirements. So important that you maintain your approval history in your system of record. So let's see how we can go about creating this approval process. Of course, it sounds complex, but trust me, it's not. And why it is not so complex? Well, because what I can do is leverage the approval templates. So right here in SharePoint, if I head over to Automate, go to Power Automate and say that I would like to create a flow. This now showcases all the templates associated with SharePoint as a data source. Of course, I can head over to Flow, go to templates and choose my template options from the 1,000+ templates that are available here. But in this case, I'm going to choose a template that's related to SharePoint because that's my data source. And all I need is to start an approval process when a new item is created in this list. So let me see, where's that? It's right here. I'm going to select this. And now this will create a flow based on a template that has been provided to us. Now, the beauty of templates is you can customize it based on your needs. Now, in this case, I'm just going to try and zoom out. It creates a flow, and the flow triggers when a new item is created in my travel request list. Perfect. I have my start and approval action right here, and it's asking me to define who this task is being assigned to. And then I have a condition that's checking the response, approve or reject, and then accordingly sending an approval email or a rejection email back to the creator. That's because that's what the template provides. It's extremely simple. And on the right hand side, they're doing some sort of error handling right here. You see this, if this fails for some reason, if the approval action fails, go get the user's profile and notify the user that there was some problem with the approval. Now, I'm not too worried about error handling, and I want to keep this flow extremely simple for all of us to understand. So I'm going ahead and deleting the right side of the branch. No error handling. Straightforward. Task is created. Check the response. Now, what's my use case? When a user creates a request, I would like to send the approval task to whom? The user's manager. That's my first level of approval. So the first thing I need is the user's manager information. So I'm going to leverage the Office 365 users action. And one of them is get manager. And right here, I will pass the created by email address of the person who created the travel request. And this will now give me the manager details for that user. And I want to begin my approval process. And who do you want to assign this task to? Simple, the manager. So I've picked the email of the manager. That's my manager approval. And I can say right here, travel request, please review. Right? So here I created my approval task. Now, when the approval action begins, this is start and wait for an approval. Basically, it's going to wait. Okay, it's going to wait for the approval's response. But in my SharePoint list, I have a status here that I'm maintaining, and I would like to change the status. When it goes to the manager approval, the status should say pending manager approval. So how do I go about doing that? Back to my flow. Right before the approval action, I will execute an update item action. Okay, I'm updating the item, the same item in SharePoint. What's my site? Connect to my SharePoint site, which is RD Tech. What's the name of my list? Well, it's travel request. What's the ID? Grab that from the trigger itself. Any mandatory fields you have to fill in. So my mandatory field was title. I'm just going to fill title back. Okay. I'm updating the item. And what am I updating? I am updating the approval status column. And because I'm starting the manager approval, I want to set the status to pending manager approval. I also have approval comments wherein I would like to maintain the history of my approval. So right here, I have something in my notepad that I placed in before because I wanted to save time. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this in. And yes, you can even add emojis right here. And this is an emoji that I copy pasted from the web, literally. So here's my approval comments that says, the process has started and it's gone to manager approval. Perfect. Goes to the manager's approval task, waits for the manager's response. And based upon the manager's response, it sends an email back to the creator specifying whether the task was approved or rejected. Now, once the manager responds, I would like to once again update the status of the item. So I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. If the manager rejects it, in that case, I would like to go ahead and change the status to rejected. So I will change the status to rejected by manager. And for the approval commands, I will go ahead and plug in rejected by. Now, who has rejected this? Well, if I go to dynamic content, I can get all that information from the approval action. So approver name, for example, get me the name of the approver. And then if you would even like the comments that the approver has put in, search for comments. There's my comments. So rejected by the approver, and here are the comments of the approver. Now, because this is a multi-line text column in SharePoint, and I am updating the item, it's going to override the previous history that I put in. So I need this approval comments again. So what do? Very simple. Just add the previous approval comments right here. Done. That's it. So if the manager says no, this is what's going to happen. Now, if the manager says yes, I'm going to copy this and paste this right here. If the manager says yes, what's my next step? I'm going to change my status to pending HR approval. I want to start another approval process. And this time, I would like to give the message right here that says approved by the approver and plug in the comments that the approver put in and the historical comments. So I am in sync again. Next, I need my approval action again. Now, instead of reinventing the wheel, once again, copy. I'm going to go ahead and paste my approval action right here. And this now is my HR approval action. So I can rename my action. And this will only trigger if the manager approves it. And this I'm going to call it travel request HR review. Okay. Now, who is this task going to be assigned to? Now, I would not like to assign this to the manager again. I would like to assign this to my HR team. So let's assume I am the HR manager. I'm playing the role of the HR manager. So I'm just plugging my email in. This can even come dynamically. You can read data from groups, grab the email addresses and plug them in here. Now that I have my approval action, what's next? Next is the same thing. I need this condition. I need all of this again. Do not reinvent the wheel. Copy, go right here, my clipboard, and paste the condition. Now what's my condition right here? I have to make a few changes, of course. The response needs to come from the HR action. So I'm going to search for response from the HR approval action. This is the response of the HR approver. If the HR approver rejects it, of course, a rejection email goes out. That's fine. And right here is where I want to change certain things. My status now would be rejected by HR. Okay. The approval commands should come now from this action, which is update item 3. So let's go to approval commands. All I'm doing is trying to maintain the history, nothing else. So rejected by whoever is my responder. Responder this time will come from the HR action, and this is flow. Sometimes it acts up, sometimes it doesn't like me playing with the approvals, with the dynamic expression dialog. So rejected by, let's try it again. Come on. All right. Rejected by the approver name, this time from the HR task. And then I would like to have the commands of my HR approver that I'm just plugging in right here. Done. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. On the left hand side, I don't want to start another approval because that's the last step. I'm going to delete this as well. And right here, I will head over and plug in my final action, which is if the HR manager has approved it, the status goes to approved because now the process is complete. And finally, right here, I would like to plug in that this is being approved by my HR approver. That's it. 10 minutes, 12 minutes, and using a template, build a sequential flow that gets data from a manager, again, assuming all of this works. And of course, always name your flows. I'm going to call this my travel request approval process flow. Okay, and click save. And if everything's good, this flow should go ahead and save. If there are any issues, it will let us know. It says you're ready to go. Okay, if I'm ready to go, let's go ahead and test this. Let's go to the main screen of the flow. Let's head over to my travel request list. Now out here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new travel request. Okay, I'm going to call this, maybe I'm traveling to Austin, Texas for some project work. Sorry for any mistypings here. Requester is Reza. Destination is somewhere in Austin, Texas. Come on. Maybe I'm going to Foundations at Austin Colony. If you like what I'm showing on the top, by the way, this is new JSON formatting options in SharePoint. It's actually plugging my location on a map. I'm going to pick my travel start date if this loads up. Okay, traveling on the 6th and returning back on the 10th. Maybe I got a good deal on Southwest Airlines for $55. I got lucky and I'm going to click on save. Now, all I have done right now is just created a record in my SharePoint list, and I'm going to select this to show you how the approval process runs live. Okay, check the header out. Check the header right here. It says manager approval, it's gray. It says HR approval, it's gray, right? Gray means the process has not started. Okay, this is just formatting in SharePoint. Now, if I head back to my flow, which is the travel request approval process flow, this flow should trigger within 30 seconds as per the SLA, 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Let's just wait and see once this flow triggers. There you go. The flow has triggered. Once the flow triggers, the first step that we execute is we change the status, right? So let's wait and see what happens right now. I'm going to select this and let's see what's happened in the flow. The flow has failed, of course. It got the manager and it tried to update the item and it says that there is an issue. All right, let me close this and let me try and resubmit this flow again. Come on. All right, so the flow has gone ahead and updated the item and now it's gone into the start and wait for an approval action. Now, if you look at the item in SharePoint, it says that the status has gone to pending approval. Here is my commands history. This was the text that I plugged in, right? Approval process has started. And just because I don't want anyone to get confused, let me just have one record in here. So we focus on that exact item. Okay. Here's my item. Now, if I select this, check the live status indicator. It says manager approval, yellow, HR approval, gray. That means right now it's under manager approval. Now, who is my manager in AD? Let's check that out. Let's go. Even I don't know. So let's go to flow and see who my manager was. It's James Taylor. Okay, so James is my manager and James would have got an approval task. So let's log in as Mr. James. Here comes Mr. James and James is a person who likes to work in Outlook. So Mr. James receives this task that says travel request, please review for Austin, Texas. And James says, okay, Reza, you're good to go. Travel immediately because James is my manager. He wants me to go for the project. And bad spellings by me. It's fine. So I go ahead and I approve this. Now, if I head back to the flow, observe how the flow recorded that statement or that action from James. And now it's gone into the condition. And remember, we have a yes branch and a no branch. Yes is when it is approved. So because it was approved, it's gone ahead and it has once again updated the item and now gone to the next step for approval, which is the human resource approval. Now, if I head back to the SharePoint list, the status has changed to pending HR approval and check the approval commands history. Full trace. Who started the approval process started. It was responded by James. Here is the comments that the approver put in. If I select this, it's going to show me the process also right here on the top. Check this out. The manager is approved, so it's green. Now it's moved to HR, so it's yellow, it's pending. Now it's gone for HR approval. Now I am playing the role of the HR approver here because I have less number of licenses in this tenant. So here's me, and I have now received that same task as the HR reviewer, wherein I can approve or reject. And this time I'll be bad. I'll say, you know what? No travel due to whatever, due to one and only COVID. And I'll click submit. And just like that, this response is also being recorded. Now, observe this. This response is recorded, goes into the condition again, checks to see the response. Because I rejected it, it goes into the no branch, sends the original creator a rejection email, and that is probably what I received. Here is my rejection email. And at the same time, it's gone ahead and updated the status of the item. Now, if I head back to my SharePoint list, check this out. The status is rejected by HR and I have a full trace. Process started, approved by my manager, which is James, rejected by the human resource admin, which is Reza. Status is rejected. If I select this, here is my process right here on the top. Here is my full approval history. Here's my status. So within a matter of minutes, literally, just by using that simple template, adding a few emojis here and there, and adding the simple logic of checking to see the response of the approver, getting the comments and all that information, you can create such kind of experiences in using Power Automate approvals. I'll show you one more use case. If you like this, I'll show you one more. Here's another one, help desk. Okay, very similar use case. Let's look at the flow first. In this case, of course, I can't build this from scratch. I wanted to build one, which I tried and I'm glad it worked. Let's look at this one. This is a more complex one. So I want to show you what is happening right here. The flow begins when a new ticket is created in my help desk application. This case, SharePoint. It could be any data source. It doesn't matter. Next step, when the user creates a ticket, they select a category for the ticket. Okay, whether it comes from it's an IT related ticket or a finance related ticket. And these categories are also coming from a different data source. Okay, SharePoint again, a different list. When you pick a category in SharePoint, I have dynamically defined my approvers. No hard coding, right? That means if the user selects, let's say, an IT ticket request, the approval task will go out to Reza and James. Dynamically, it will read this and assign the tasks. And that's exactly what I'm doing in this flow. First step, when the record is created, I go and grab the information from the departments list. Then I loop through all those approvers, create a join. Basically, I need semicolon separated email addresses. Remember, I need that because the approval action only accepts that. And that's what I'm providing right here. And this time the task is everyone must approve. That means the flow will not move ahead until everyone says yes. If even one person says no or reject, this process stands rejected. Okay. And after that, it's more or less similar to the previous experience that I showcased. So let me go ahead and test this one out. So right here, I'll create a new item. And this time I'm using Power Apps for customizing my SharePoint list. Okay, so I have a connectivity issue. And this is a very high priority ticket. And I would like this ticket to be fixed by Tuesday. And my description doesn't matter. And category, I'll select IT. These are those categories that are defined right here. Okay, so IT ticket goes to Reza and James. I will click save. Now, the moment I do this, what's going to happen? The approval process begins. Now, while the approval process starts, if you look at the approval commands here, the way I'm tracking for a different, as in for this list, you see I have much more information tracked. Who started the approval, at what date, at what time? What was their response? How long did they take to respond? And what were their comments? I've heard many folks say this. Reza Nintex and K2 gives me a lot of information around how long the approval action was taken. I can do metrics. You can do all that here as well. Just a few formulas here and there, and you can get all those information. Okay, all of this just to waste time. So I'm going to refresh my screen. And as you can see, my process now, the status of the ticket is pending. The approval process was started by me at 9:42 a.m. This is probably my SharePoint site is in Pacific time. And of course, the approval process begins. Now, if we observe the flow run, okay, the running flow right now, it has gone ahead and assigned tasks. It should assign tasks dynamically to Reza and James only. And the flow now will start, create the approval, and now wait for the approval. Here's Reza. Reza has received that task. Here is James. James has also received that task. That means I've dynamically defined my approvers. So let's say in this case, James says, okay, just so that we distinguish this. James says, okay. And on the other side, Reza says, okay. These are just my commands and I'm approving. Both of them say approved. Okay. Both of them have said approved. If we look at the approval process now, it's going to move ahead, grab all that information, join all the approval commands, grab all that information, and then change the status of the item. And if I head back right here, check this out. I have the full approval history right here. Here's my item and here is my approval history, right? Reza started it, approved by Reza at this date and this time. Of course, I responded in 0 minutes. I was really efficient. Within a minute, I responded, of course, for both the actions. And I have James' information in there as well. So you can even dynamically define approvers. I have 15 minutes. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can. State machine approvals. How many times we want a scenario wherein an approval moves from part 1 to part 2, user 1 to user 2, user 2 rejects it, goes back to user 1, user 1 asks for more information, goes back to the user, back and forth, right? How many times we come across a scenario like that? Go to templates and just search for state machine. Just search for state machine. Believe it or not, there's a template for this as well. Yes, it uses SharePoint as a data source, but it's okay. You can change this. You don't have to live with SharePoint. Just create the flow. Look at the pattern they are leveraging for state machine, right? Look at the pattern and then delete SharePoint. If SharePoint is not your use case, remove SharePoint. Your use case is SQL, connect to SQL. It's just a pattern that they are defining. So you can create state machine style workflows as well. I'll show you 2 other patterns. If I can get to it. All right, reminder pattern, right? What if the approver is not responding? Well, I've sent this approval task to this approver. He's got it in Teams, email, mobile app, approval center, but still the user is not responding. What do I do? Well, create a pattern and flow. There's no magic. There's no magic button here that says send a reminder. There's nothing like that today. I'm hoping it comes in future. But you can create a pattern, and here's my pattern. The flow triggers. Again, this is just an example. The flow begins. I set a variable to false. Then I execute a parallel branch and flow. How do you create one? Just go here and add a parallel branch. On the left-hand side, I'm running my approval action. This is start and wait for an approval. So when would the flow move ahead? Only if the response is taken. If the response is taken, I will set the variable to true, that same variable. Now on the right hand side, I am running a do until loop. So this loop will keep running until this variable turns true. And when will this turn true? Only if the approval decision is taken. What happens if it's not taken? Well, that's what I'm defining right here. I am executing a delay of 30 seconds for the demo today, of course. Ideally, this would be 1 day, 2 day, whatever your use case is. And then I'm checking to see if this variable ever changed. If it changed, great. If it did not, go and send a reminder email. That's it. And that defines an approval reminder pattern. Yes, I had to do more work in flow, but it's a pattern that I can reuse. So let me go ahead and try and run this flow. All right, the flow is running. Let's see what's happening right now. The flow comes to this point, okay? And now the parallel branches are running. Both the branches are running in parallel. On the left-hand side, it's waiting for my approval response. On the right-hand side, in the do until loop, I am running this loop until this variable is true. And within this loop, I'm delaying for 30 seconds. And I'm trying to waste time right now, so 30 seconds goes by. Now, if I head back to my email, here is the main approval task that got created. Now, if I do not respond to this task, every 30 seconds, and here you go, every 30 seconds, I'm going to get that nagging email. Okay, that's my reminder email. And this can be as elaborative as you want. This is just an example. And the user will keep receiving this email every 30 seconds until and unless the user finally goes and takes a decision on the approval task, no matter from where they respond to the task to. Teams, the email, mobile app, approval center, it doesn't matter. And once they respond, okay, don't send me more reminders. Once they respond, right, and we'll see what happens. Once they respond to this action, check this out. The response is coming in, I hope. Come on. All right, the response is recorded. The variable is set. Now what's going to happen on the right-hand side after 30 seconds is just going to stop. It won't send that email. That loop will also complete and the flow is done. The reason is because the variable is now set to true. I won't receive any other reminder emails. This was the last one that I had received. I won't receive any one after this. And I can check to see this in 30 seconds. There you go. The flow is finished. And that's how you can simply create a reminder pattern. I'll show you one last pattern, escalation. What if I've assigned a task to someone who is even ignoring my reminders? Or maybe someone who's out of office. You can even check that in flow, by the way. There's an out of office action, but let's assume this person is just unwilling to respond, right? In that case, once again, what we can do is execute a parallel action, but this time I'll show you one neat trick here. For the start and wait for an approval action, if you head over to settings, you can define the timeout for this action, like how long before this action times out. For today's demo, my timeout is PT1M, that is 1 minute. This follows the ISO 8601 format. All documentation is available for this. You can just plug in your numbers here. 1 day, 2 day, 10 day, 5 day, whatever use case you have. In my case, 1 minute. And of course, I don't want to waste your time. So I will go ahead and run the flow so that we can see this in action straight away. Because it's going to take a minute before it times out. That's the least, I believe that's the least time that I have to set. Come on, we got 11 minutes. All right. So while the flow is running, let me go through the flow. So right here, I've defined my timeout for this action. Now in flow, you can decide when does the next action run by defining configure run after. So right here, I'm saying this section should run only if this action has timed out. Otherwise, keep running the flow as is. So imagine a scenario. I'm assigning an approval task to Reza. Reza is just not responding. In that case, if Reza does not respond in the stipulated amount of time, in my case, 1 minute, which is very aggressive. In that case, I'm going and grabbing Reza's manager and sending an escalation approval task to my manager. Let's check this in action. I ran this flow. Here's the flow run. The flow is running. Right now, it's still with Reza. Reza would have received the approval task. And here is Reza's approval task. Now, if I head back to the flow run, once it hits 1 minute, there you go. Bang on time, 1 minute. This task is now obsolete. It's kind of timed out, right? This is timed out. Even if Reza responds, it doesn't matter now. Even if I say, I don't like this, actually, flow should not allow me. But Even if I respond, it will tell you that your response is approved, but it's not going to count that. It's already moved ahead. And now what's happened is it's gone to AD, grabbed my manager. In this case, my manager is probably my wife in this tenant. Yeah. So logging in as my wife sounds a little weird. This time I'm going to head over to the approval action, and here's the escalation task assigned to my manager, and the manager can now respond to the approval task. So these are patterns. These are not inbuilt features that you can add and the approval task will automatically send reminders or escalate. No, these are not available, but patterns are. And trust me, utilizing all these patterns, reminders, escalations, state machines, you can create amazing experiences. I want to leave time for Q&A in the end, so I'm going to quickly head back to our presentation. A few best practices. Plan for flow run duration of 30 days. Now, very important to understand that a flow by design runs only for 30 days, start to finish, 30 days. Now, in that, if I have approval action and the approver is not responding for 30 days, that task is also going to time out. Okay, it's going to time out. So you have to handle that. There's no magic. It's not going to automatically handle it. It's not going to restart. I've done a full video on this actually. I've done 7 videos on approvals that covers this scenario. But the point being, you need to handle this. It's not going to handle it automatically for you. Reminder pattern. Use that. Notify your approvers if they're not responding. Send them reminders, not every 30 seconds, but at least every day or every 3 days. Use the escalation pattern. If someone is still not responding based on the reminders, okay, escalate it to their manager or auto approve it or auto reject it, whatever your use case is, but make sure that you are completing your flow. And utilize all the options. Don't turn off those notifications. Don't give the approvers an excuse to say that they missed the approval task, right? Give them all options so that they can approve or reject from their source of choice. Limitations. Important to note the limitations. 1, the flow run duration is max 30 days. This is not the approval action. I've heard this a lot on the forums. What are the forums Reza keeps talking about? Community forums where people ask questions. And the common question is, I have 3 approval actions in my flow. Does each action get 30 days? No, the entire flow gets 30 days. It doesn't matter how many actions you add. Of course, flow has the 250 action limit, but that's a different case. The flow run is only 30 days. You have to live within that. Otherwise, you can use a pattern that I've defined. So you can check that out. Approval forms. This is another very common question. I want to customize the form, right? I get those buttons. Yeah, you can customize those buttons. You saw that. And you get a comments that's optional. But how do I, add another piece of metadata in there? Well, you can't do that today. You cannot. These things are coming. Also, approvals cannot be assigned to group email addresses. You cannot do that. You can't say that, you know what, I have this SharePoint group or this AD security group that I would like to send email to, which is a very common case, but you cannot directly use that email address. However, you can loop through them and get the email addresses. I've done a video on that also. Approval history. It is only retained for 28 days. So do not trust Flow to maintain your approval history. You need to maintain it. You saw that today, how I was maintaining it by leveraging that little smart trick of, adding the comments and kind of stacking them up together. Also, approvals are stored in Microsoft Dataverse, whether you like it or not. It is stored in Microsoft Dataverse. Well, Raza, Dataverse is a premium feature. So does that mean approvals is premium? No, approvals is not premium. It's not. It's the only piece that you get for free in Dataverse. In your default environment, actually, by default, when you create the first approval action, what's happening at the back end, it's actually spinning off that database. If there was never a database created, this is all what happens at the back end. If you create a new environment, let's say I create a new environment in Power Platform. If you create the first approval task, you will see that the approval task will take a lot of time to get started. The reason is because at the back end, it's creating the environment, setting up the entities or tables now, is doing a lot of work. Okay. So all this information is stored in Dataverse, and of course, it's only maintained for 28 days. Learning resources, before we head over to questions. I've done a full approval video series. So I'll highly recommend you to check that out, not because I've done it, but because I've received some really good feedback on it. So check that out. 7 videos from basics all the way to complex scenarios. Of course, docs.microsoft.com. You got to trust the documentation. Any new feature comes in, any update is made, that's the link that you need to go to. Also, the approval details section. I've seen many folks ask this question. I want to add a table in there. I want to style something in there. The language that it supports is something known as Markdown. So that's the link on how you can leverage that. They have shown some really good examples on docs.microsoft.com. So I will recommend checking that out. And finally, thank you for listening to me for what, 56 minutes. And these are the details to connect with me. And now I will open the floor for questions. And hello.
Hello, thank you,
Right.
Reza.
Welcome.
So we all, I think, really enjoyed that session.
Great.
There's a lot of thanks from the chat. I think there's one question.
Yes. And I think your voice is, I think I lost your audio, Raz.
Hi, Reza.
Hi.
So there is one question by Zafar who's asking, can we,
Yes.
instead of adding multiple action blocks for each
Yep.
step, copy paste
Yep.
for different
Yep.
approval levels, do it recursively?
Yes, we could do that recursively as well. The problem with the recursive action in Flow is that when something runs in a loop, Flow does not show you what's happening while that flow is running, right? If you ever want to go and check and see what's happening, where is it stuck in, which state is my flow running in, you can't see that. So that's the reason why I tend to avoid it. And another thing, if I'm running something recursively, let's say I want to assign my approval task one after the other dynamically to 10 people, right? That means those 10 people have to respond in 30 days. It's not a good design to run. If you ask me, it's not a great design to run something recursively, especially the approval action. I would potentially avoid that.
And another question, during today's session, there was information that approvals are also stored in CDS Dataverse as data in an entity table, that what you just mentioned earlier, but I'm trying to find the entity like approval as it was in the demo, but I'm not successful. Can you explain how this works?
So I'm assuming the question is, can I grab the information from the tables itself? Yes, you can. But if you try and grab the information from the tables, that is a premium feature. When you're trying to connect to tables in Dataverse, that requires premium licensing, period. So is that possible? Yes. I've actually shown that in one of my videos, so do check that out. Shameless promotion, sorry.
And finally, Audrey. So Audrey's dropped a nice comment. Love how you leverage JSON formatting on SharePoint to highlight progress from the workflow. The audit trail is perfect. Great solutioning.
Thank you. Is that Audrey Gordon? Oh my, all right.
Yep, I think you're amazing, Reza.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
I took notes.
I'm a big fan of your work. And by the way, that if you want to see JSON formatting, that's on my channel as well. I have 1, 2, 3 videos, a 4th one coming next Thursday. Wow, I see a lot of comments. Thank you, everyone. I can't thank everyone individually. I'll try and give likes and hearts, but I see all of that. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you joining.